Thorns and Shadows by S.R. Martin. Chapter 1. The forest soil was plowed and drenched with blood. Looked like a pack of boars had rooted through it, but the tracks left in the mud did look nothing like a boar's. They were big as a bear's paw, but with at least a dozen claws instead of 5. The number of ragged marks varied from print to print, as if the beast had a different number of claws on every limb. Heinrich stood up tall and looked around the forest clearing. A felled tree lay where it had fallen, its leaves still green. A trail led away from the forest. At least half a dozen boots had trampled down that path not long ago. The creature, the Ungeheuer, whatever it was, had crashed through the undergrowth at the other side of the clearing and vanished deeper into the forest. The hunter made his way across the huge lumber clearing, stepping around the countless stumps left by the axes with quick, efficient steps. He was a tall man, with wide shoulders and strong arms, yet he moved with the nimble grace of a lynx. He stopped at the bushes, where a man-sized hole was broken through the thick, thorny undergrowth. As he examined the thorns and broken branches, the frown on his weathered face grew, and his deep-set, steel-blue eyes became thoughtful. He made his decision, then wheeled around and left the clearing with long steps, returning to the muddy lumbering path, yet follow until the smell of blood had alarmed him. His purposeful stride made short work of the rest of the way. Soon he spotted a faint wisp of smoke from a chimney rising above the trees, and soon after the trees cleared once more, giving way to small vegetable plots and green pastures. In the middle of the clearing stood a village hamlet. It was fortified with a ditch and wooden palisade, like was common with all villages in the word forest, at least with the villages that still stood. The bridge at the main gate was drawn up, the gate closed. It was a trifle thing, roped together from roughly hewn wood, just wide enough for a single wagon. Closing the gates was a prudent precaution for every night in the word. It was only late afternoon, and the autumn sun had yet to reach the treetops. Atop the rickety tower watching over the gate stood a single lookout, who raised a hunting crossbow as Heinrich approached. The man was old and lanky, his face badly shaved and long as a horse's. A grey, woolen cloak hung from his shoulders, heavy with rain. "Halt! Who goes there?" he challenged. Heinrich slowly raised a hand in greeting and pushed his wide-brimmed felt hat back to reveal his face. He was a strong-jawed man, his beard grown thick after 2 weeks spent in the wild, his shoulder-length black hair graying at the temples. "Good day to you, sir. I'm a huntsman from the White Man's Lodge," he replied, holding up his silver gilt amulet for the man to see, shaped like 2 arrows crossed in front of a hunting horn. The guard slowly lowered his crossbow, but still eyed Heinrich with suspicion. Heinrich's hunting leathers were old and often mended, and any bandit could steal an amulet of a corpse. "The guild?" the guard inquired. "Are you with the other 3, here for the bounty?" Heinrich shook his head. "I'm alone and know of no bounty. I've been searching for medical mushrooms. I found them this morning not far from here," he explained, opening his waxed satchel, showing the freshly gathered mushrooms inside. "All I'm looking for is a place to stay the night, and maybe buy some provisions before I head back to Ambeck tomorrow." The guard scanned the edge of the forest beyond Heinrich. Only when he was satisfied that the white man was no vanguard for brigands did he relax his crossbow and put it to the side. "All right, give me a minute. I'll lower the bridge for you." The man vanished from sight. Shortly after, wood creaked in protest as the drawbridge was winched down and the gate swung open. Heinrich tipped his hat as he walked over the bridge and past the gate. "Thank you, good sir," he said. The guard nodded and hurried to close the gate and pull the bridge back up. "It's a bit early for the gate to be closed," Heinrich mused. "Expecting trouble." "There's a beast on the loose," the man grunted, then held in his work and looked at the hunter, his eyes wide with fear. A proper ungeheuer, if you ask me. But the other huntsmen who came have killed a mangy bear and tells we are safe. He shrugged. I'm no huntsman, but the dead we found were not killed by a bear, so I keep the gate shut. Good man. Heinrich nodded, and his gaze drifted over the muddy yard, past the wooden well, onto the long, fortified house that dominated the hamlet. Simple, wooden stairs ran up to a low, heavy door on the timber-framed second floor. In case the palisade was breached, the steps would be torn down, and the defenders could shoot from the narrow windows. That's quite the weapon you've got there, the guard remarked, eyeing the heavy wooden shaft that, when put on the ground, reached Heinrich's shoulders, and the wax cloth bag that hid the tip of the weapon from the elements, as long and thick as the man's lower arm. White man's spear, Heinrich explained, leaning the weapon onto his shoulder. The gaze of the guard drifted to the hunter's belt, where he carried a skinning knife and a number of leather pouches. But what caught the guard's attention was the white man's messer, a single-edged short sword with a nasty point and hollow handle made from hammered bronze. He gave the hunter a stern glare. Don't you make me no trouble, he grunted. Heinrich lifted his hand in a placating gesture and shook his head. No trouble. You've got my word. The guard gave another grunt, then went back to his work. So Heinrich put his spear back down and used it as a walking staff as he approached the fortified house. The steps creaked even under his soft-soled boots as he climbed them. He banged on the door with his fist. It's open, someone shouted from the inside. Heinrich opened the low door and ducked inside, but paused just past the threshold. All conversation in the room fell silent as everyone looked up to inspect the armed stranger. Good day, Heinrich said, tipping his hat, and introduced himself once more as he had done at the gate. He took in the room while he spoke. There were 10 armed men. They slowly relaxed as Heinrich spoke, and hands were withdrawn from weapons. 3 of them wore the medallion of the guild. A young, black-haired man with somber eyes, a woman, hardly more than a girl, with fiery hair and freckles, wearing a single leather mitten on her left hand, and an old red-nosed trapper. They all wore long knives in their belts and hunting leathers. The 2 youngsters were green and brown, while the often mended clothes of the veteran were black and grey. The 7 others looked like farmers and woodcutters. They wore no armor and only had knives or hatchets hanging from their belts. I'm just looking for a place to stay the night. I'll head back to Ambeck in the morning. Was hoping to hitch a ride on a lumber raft, actually. Heinrich finished his introduction. The room had a low ceiling. Stairs ran up and down in the back, and there was a door to further rooms on the left. The arrow-slit windows were too small to climb through, and closed with parchment to keep the cold out. A long table and benches stood in the center of the room, and a fire burned in a stone fireplace to the left. Apart from the armed man, 2 children played under the stairs, and a murky-eyed crone sat in a chair at the fireplace under wool blankets. The cadaver of a mangy, brown bear lay in front of the table. In life, the animal must have been a head taller than a man, and even in its half-starved state, thrice as heavy. It was an impressive kill, despite the animal's apparent bad health, which could have driven it to attack livestock and even humans. You're on your own? Not here for the bounty? The man sitting at the center of the table spoke up. He was stocky, with ham-like fists and receding blonde hair. From all the villagers, his clothes had the least number of patches. Heinrich nodded. That's right. I'm here by chance, not for the bounty. The farmer looked at the other 3 hunters, who shrugged or nodded, then stood up and spread his arms in a wide gesture. All right, then. Welcome to Waldfurt, good hunter. I'm Conrad the Schultz. It's my honor to have you stay as a guest under my roof, he proclaimed, then gestured for his people to make room at the right end of the table. Please, you must be hungry from your travels. Have a seat and eat with us. Despite his polite words, his tone was strained, and it was clear that he would have thrown Heinrich out had tradition not demanded otherwise. The villagers shuffled closer together to make room at the table, still eyeing Heinrich warily, mumbling quietly among themselves. "I thank you for your hospitality," Heinrich spoke, apparently unbothered by the welcome he had received. He leaned his spear next to the door and put down his rucksack, then sat down with a nod of thanks. One of the maids hurried through the door and came back with a plate of rye bread, salt and lard, as well as a tankard of thin ale, and set it down in front of Heinrich. He gave her a smile and a nod of thanks. While he started filling his rumbling stomach, the conversation it interrupted resumed. "So as I was just saying," the dark-eyed white man spoke up, "we tracked down the beast which has attacked your village. Turned out to be this starving she-bear. It had rabies, that's why it attacked, and your man got sick. But worry not, we put it down. You are safe now." He patted a piece of paper in front of the Schultz. "Now, if you could sign this confirmation for the guild, we can finish this contract." Conrad chewed on his lower lip and looked around the room, lingering on the blind crone, frowned deeply. "I don't know," he said, scratching his chin. "The tracks we found looked like no bear." "That's because of the rain," the hunter interjected. "You said it yourself. The beast only attacked at night when it rained. It's easy to mistake a bear for a real ungeheuer if it's charging at you, especially in the dark of night." "But Gunther was smashed to a pulp. No way a bear could have done this," one of the woodcutters protested. "It had rabies. You wouldn't believe how aggressive a rabid bear can get," the hunter retorted. The village chief's protest became quieter. "But the tracks," he said. "Are you the guild hunter? Or us?" The old trapper threw in with a sharp look. "Trust us, we're experts in this," the young woman added, and the leader patted the paper once more. Slowly, Conrad nodded and reached for a quill to sign the paper. "Those tracks belong to no bear," Heinrich spoke from the side, with a mouthful of bread. "What?" The young hunter gasped and jerked to the side to look at him, eyes gleaming with anger. Heinrich chewed, washed down the bread with a gulp of beer, then set down the tankard and wiped his mouth on the back of his hand. Only then did he meet the younger man's gaze evenly. "I said those tracks belonged to no bear," he explained again, then looked sharply at the red-haired huntress. "Trust me, I'm an expert in this," he snarled contemptuously. The young hunter stared at Heinrich for a moment, then looked to the side at his companion. The woman grimaced and nodded towards Heinrich. Then the young hunter stood up from his place at the bench and took a step towards him. "What are you saying? You're calling me a liar," he barked. Heinrich remained seated and held the other man's stare without flinching. "I'm just stating facts," he said, then looked around the room, raising his voice. "The site of the attack is drenched in blood. It's plowed over like a field." Several of the farmers nodded in agreement. "And the tracks leading from the site are big as a bear's, but they have more than 12 claws on each paw." He looked back at the young hunter who was clenching his teeth, his fist clamped around the grip of his knife. "The tracks were muddy, almost washed away by the rain," he snarled. "I could read them well enough," Heinrich replied calmly. "So tell me, Master White Man, what kind of ungeheuer made those tracks?" Heinrich shrugged. "I don't know." "Ha! You don't know shit, old man," the young hunter barked. "Yet!" Heinrich's voice cracked through the room like a whip, silencing the younger man. He stood up, took a step toward the other hunter, holding his hands relaxed at his side, but his legs and back were tense like springs, ready to jump into sudden violence. "I don't know what kind of ungeheuer had killed those men yet," he repeated, looking the younger man in the eye, then glanced around the room, meeting the gaze of the other hunters and the Schultz. "But I know this bear didn't do it," he exclaimed, pointing at the animal's corpse. "And will advise not to sign the letter of confirmation to the guild." He met the young man's eyes again, whose brow began to shine with cold sweat. Heinrich smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. But it's easy to mistake a bear for a proper ungeheuer in the dark. An honest mistake to make. No harm done, right? He took a step to the side and began walking through the room. This ungeheuer seems to be as tricky as it is deadly, so let me offer my help. Let's find out what is actually haunting these woods and kill it. His short speech earned him nods of agreement from the villagers. While the old trapper looked down at his ale, the young woman stared daggers into Heinrich, and the young hunter looked utterly lost. Heinrich stepped right in front of him and held out his hand. "What do you say? Shall we join the hunt together?" he exclaimed, then added in a quieter, dangerous voice. "It's the only way we'll save face with the guild and claim that bounty. Believe me." The young man hesitated for a moment, his jaws working, but eventually took Heinrich's hand in a crushing grip. "Let us kill an ungeheuer," he grunted, through the clenched teeth of a forced smile. Uncomfortable silence settled over the room. "There is one who has seen the monster and survived the attack," the crone spoke up after a moment in a raspy voice. Heinrich turned and stepped toward her. "Is he here? Let's speak to him about the attack." The crone raised a bony finger, pointing to the room upstairs. "Sadly, he is wounded, shaking with fever in his bed upstairs." Heinrich took 2 steps toward the stairs and glanced over at the Schultz. "May I examine the wounded? I may not be able to help him, but may give us a clue on the nature of the ungeheuer," he explained. Conrad hesitated a moment, looked over at the old woman, who smiled quietly. "Now this is a proper white man," she murmured. "All right," Conrad said and stood up. "I'll show you upstairs." He picked up a tallow candle and walked past Heinrich, up the stairs, opening the hatch to the dark room above. Rows of straw-filled bed frames stood in 2 rows, filling the long room. Heinrich had to duck under low ceiling beams that held up the thatched roof above. Conrad led him to one end of the room, where a man lay shivering underneath a heap of blankets. Behind them, a woman, wearing a simple dress and an apron, climbed up the stairs. She had strong arms and a kind face. Streaks of grey were showing in her tightly bound red hair. "I'm Irmgard. I saw to Bruno's wounds," she explained. Heinrich just nodded and waited for her to catch up and overtake them. Conrad put on the candle next to the bed, then reached past and opened the shutters of the room's single window, letting in the afternoon sun. The man in the bed winced when the light hit his eyes, and he stirred awake, blinking and confused. "Oh, what?" he muttered. Irmgard put a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. "A white man has come from the city to hunt the beast that attacked you. Can you tell him what you saw?" The man took a moment. He was pale, and sweat stood on his brow. "Water," he begged, trying to wet his parched lips with his dry tongue. Irmgard took a pitcher of water that stood next to the bed. She poured a cup, then helped the wounded to raise his head and put the cup to his lips. After drinking half a cup, the man nodded his thanks and slumped back into the bed. "The beast," the man began, his eyes wide and haunted. "It came in the rain." The man told Heinrich of the day he was attacked. He and 2 other villagers, the best hunters in the village, had gone out hunting for the beast, after it had attacked the woodcutters at the lumber site and killed one of them. They followed the tracks deeper into the wood for many hours, all the while thinking that they were closing in, all the while feeling that they were being watched. "But it was us who were being hunted, lured into a trap. When it started to rain, the beast jumped us from a bramble thicket." A coughing fit shook the man, and Irmgard had to feed him another sip of water before he could continue his tale. One of the 3 hunters had been immediately crushed underneath the beast. The others took their spears and stabbed at it, but it was fast and its hide thick. Before the man knew it, he was alone, on the ground, the beast over him.
Let me go. I don't know why, but I ran as fast as my legs could carry me. I can still hear the sound when I close my eyes. The sound of crushing bones.
The wounded man shook his head, pressing his eyes shut. Did you see it? What did it look like? Heinrich asked.
Didn't see much. It was dark. It all happened so fast. One was big as a bear. Its fur was long, shaggy. Brambles were stuck in it. Something. But in war.
He shook his head, as if not believing his own memory.
Didn't make a sound.
Heinrich nodded, rubbing his mangy beard in thought. May I have a look at your wound? He asked. The man hesitated for a moment and looked at Irmgard. Only when she gave him a slight reassuring nod did he agree to have his wound examined by a stranger. She carefully pulled back the blanket, revealing the man's sweat-soaked body and bandaged shoulder. The smell of herbs was strong. The man winced as she began unwrapping the bandage, revealing the wound. It was a claw mark. Of the numerous claws Heinrich had seen in the tracks, only 3 seemed to have hit the man, tearing ragged streaks out of his flesh. The wound was well cleaned, the bandages clean, and the herbs smelled fresh and strong. There was almost no pus, but the man was burning up, his shoulder red and swollen. An infection was spreading along the red veins of the arm. No, not red. Heinrich wrinkled his brow, leaned down to have a closer look, and squinted. Those streaks visible through the skin were green. It's no ordinary infection, he said grimly. Irmgard, too, did a double take on the wound. Her eyes went wide in horror.
This was not there this morning. It almost looks.
She shook her head, unable to finish the sentence. Like a plant is growing in his flesh, Heinrich nodded.
Have you ever seen something like that?
Conrad asked. The hunter shook his head. Never. But I've heard of things like this. Ungeheuer planting their seeds in a man's wound. He put a hand on Irmgard's shoulder. We have to get it out of him, if he is to survive. She looked at him aghast.
I'm no surgeon. You should get help from Ambeck.
Heinrich shook his head. If it's this bad already, it will be too late when a surgeon arrives. We have to get it out now. He looked gravely at Conrad. If the man dies, the Ungeheuer seed will consume him, turn him into an Ungeheuer himself. The Schultz went pale, cold sweat prickling on his face.
Are you certain?
I'm sure he'll die if we do nothing, Heinrich replied.
Do it!
Bruno grunted from his bed, mustering desperate strength. Are you sure? Heinrich asked. I will not lie. This will be painful. You might die anyway. The wounded farmer grimaced, but nodded.
At least I will die human.
I'll fetch what tools we need, Irmgard said. She too was pale, expression grim, but willing to do what had to be done. Heinrich walked to the next bed, began unbuckling his weapon belt, stripping down to his shirt, piling his belongings on the floor.
Can you do this?
Conrad asked him quietly. The white man took a long glance at the wounded man in the light of the setting sun. I'm no surgeon. I've dressed wounds before, but my usual knife work is skinning and butchering game, he explained in hushed tones. Between Irmgard and me, I just make this work. Frowned deeply. If you pray to any gods, now might be the time. After a few minutes, Irmgard came back up, carrying a basket. In it, she had clean cloth, steaming water, needle and thread, and a collection of sharp knives and small tongs that were clean but did not look delicate enough for the intended work. She set the basket down next to the bed. She took a glance at Heinrich, who was rolling up his sleeves. "Go into the kitchen and wash your hands thoroughly with soap," she told him. Heinrich nodded and hurried down the stairs. If they wanted to have any chance of success, they could not waste what little daylight they had left. He came back a minute later, sleeves rolled up, revealing muscle-coated arms covered in pale, old scars. He took up one of the tongs, knelt on the floor next to Irmgard. "You cut the skin open, I pull out the roots. We have to get out the seed, and as much of the roots as we can," he explained. The woman nodded, took up a leather-wrapped biting wood, and offered it to their patient to bite on. "Be brave," she said. The man took the bit with a wide-eyed nod of thanks and braced for the pain.